Guys, we got a new drone. We got a new drone, new video, new build. We got a new drone, a new build video. Let's check this thing out. Here it is, guys. Like I said, just got done building this freshly built drone. We're out here today to do the first test flight. If you want to see the build portion of the video, stick around. We're going to get into that. If you only want to see me fly this thing, go to this timestamp here, bring you right back to me here, and we'll get into the flight portion of the video. So as usual, we're going to go through all the parts before we get started with the build. Okay, so starting out here with our frame, this is the Moxy by Bubby FPV. This is a rotorriot frame. The reason I picked this frame is the 3D prints it comes with. So one of my biggest problems when it comes to these drone frames is most of them come with like the bolt-on style GoPro mount, where it's just like you use the GoPro feet that fold down, but that's just not stable. You hit like a little bump and the whole GoPro is going to be flopping around. So these you can get, you can buy them from rotorriot or from Noozle 3D, which is the company or the person that makes their prints. So you can get different, 25, 30 degree, whatever GoPro mounts. These are a nice stable mount. It's going to protect your GoPro, keep it where you need it to be. This frame will work out really well for us. We don't have to worry about mounting issues when it comes to antennas and things like that. Next thing here is our stack, our flight controller and ESC. As usual, I'm going with the Speedybee. They have some of the best, cheapest stacks available. I think this one was only like 70 bucks. Now this is the V4, and I usually use the V3, but the V3 was not in stock. There's fairly minor differences, V3 to V4. The V4 has this big heat sink, and I think it's 55 amp versus 50, which again, not a big deal, not a big difference, but these are just really reliable, and so far they've been great in everything I put them in. And for the money, you just can't beat them. And for our video system, we are doing an O3 Air Unit. I recently picked up some goggles too, which I am very excited about because I've been running the V2 this whole time. And if anyone has flown with the V2 and then the goggles too, you know how much of a difference it is when it comes to video quality. It really is that much of a difference, 810 to 1080p. These things are crystal clear. Since they did the recent price drop, I decided to pick some of these up. So we're going with an O3 build. And for the motors, we are going with some iFlight Xing motors. These are a 2306 2450 kV. I went with the purple to kind of match the build. I think these look really nice, and they weren't too bad. I think they were 20 a piece, which is a little more than I usually spend, but I mean, they're not like $25 or $30 motors, so not too bad. But yeah, these things are really good looking. And for our control link, we're going with the typical setup that I usually do, which is the Happymodel EP1 Dual. It's a true diversity express ELRS receiver. This thing works great. And then I've got some extra antennas for different options because typically the antennas it comes with aren't quite long enough to go front and back on most frames. So I've got a couple extra antennas so that we can set this thing up the way we need it to be. All right, so I'm gonna start with getting kind of the bottom end of the frame put together, get the arms put on. So we got our hardware here. So if you look at this, hopefully you can see it's a little bit wider on this side as far as the press nut, and on this side it's thinner. So you want the screws to be going in on the thinner side. That way it's pulling down on the press nut. Okay, you can see here we've got 4 of them in. We need to get the other 4 in the center there. So this is your bottom plate, this X piece. Your arms get squished between this and the mid plate, which is a one-piece design. And again, pay attention to the press nuts. You can see here how the wider part is up here. So they got pressed in through this way. So you want the screw to be pulling down, pulling it further into the carbon. We got all the arms mounted up. This is how it should look, like I said, with the points kind of pointing front and back. So the next thing we're gonna do is get the stack screws in. So these larger holes there you see, the screw is gonna go through that hole and then to the mid plate, and they're gonna come through there for our 30-30 stack mounting. I have a bunch of extra hardware. I recommend doing this if you're gonna be building a lot of drones. Go on Amazon and get some M2 and M3 kits. That way you never have to worry about if your frame comes with the correct hardware. But I'm gonna see if the stack screws will fit in this frame first. So it looks like the screws that came with the Speedybee stack are actually too long. So this is the standoff, which the top plate sits on this, and the screw actually is a little bit longer than the standoff. So we're gonna need some shorter screws. So the ones that come with the Speedybee stack are too long. So what I've got here is, I'm using the screws that came with the stack, the Speedybee stack, the ones that were too long, but this hardware kit has washers. I recommend getting a hardware kit with washers. Get an M2 kit and an M3 kit, but make sure you get one with washers. So what we got going on here is we're using those ones that are too long, but we've got a washer on there. So basically, the big holes here in the frame, instead of the screw going all the way through the hole, it's actually gonna stop right there and be flush. Whoa. It's actually gonna stop right there and be flush with the other screws, rather than go all the way through the frame. So there's a washer there, and if you didn't know, you never wanna have a stack screw on without having it held down by a nut. It's gonna cause the gyro to freak out and you're gonna have weird issues. So now the stack screw sits nicely and it's not too long or too short. Okay, so now we've got all of our stack screws in there, and we're gonna get some solder on these pads. So I'm gonna tin the pads for the XT60 first. It helps if you have a nice big tip. Let's see, helps if you have a big tip on your soldering iron to really transfer the heat well and quickly. So I recommend getting a nice big tip. Positive. Negative. Another thing that you should have on hand is some XT60 wire. This is 12 gauge. I recommend 12 gauge. There's two 25-foot rolls in here, and this was pretty cheap. This might have been 25 or 30 bucks for these two rolls of wire. So I've cut my own lengths of wire here. They're a bit longer than the XT60 that came with it, but I've already tinned the ends here too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna solder these to my ESC, and I'm gonna leave the ends blank. I'm not gonna put the XT60 on. I'm gonna wait till the end to kind of see wire lengths wise if I need to trim these back some or if they're good where they're at. So I'm not gonna put the XT60 on, but we're gonna solder these on right now. All right, that looks pretty good. It's on there nice and solid. That's one of the easier ones I've ever done with the negative. Positive always goes on easy, but the negative is always very difficult. But we got that on there, that's good. Now we can get the positive on there. All right, those both look good. They're nice and solidly on there, so that's good. I'm gonna throw the capacitor on too while we're at it. But I was having some trouble with the capacitor and where to mount that, so I did a few things off camera, but I'm gonna show you what I did here. So basically, the issue is that the O3 is gonna need to go in the back here, and there's just no room for the capacitor. Even though it's a small capacitor, it just wasn't gonna fit in there with the wires the way I wanted to hook things up. Basically what I did was I soldered two more wires to the bottom of the XT60 lead, and those are gonna run underneath the board, and then they go to the capacitor here. So that way when I put it down, the capacitor will sit up front. I can show you here. And I'm probably gonna cover this with some, I'm gonna cover the connections with some tape or something. They're not gonna touch. I know it's hard to see, but they're not gonna touch anything. They'd be fine as they are, but I'll show you. So you can see the wires just run underneath the board on both sides. You can see the red runs underneath there. There's plenty of room under there because we have those nuts. So with the camera plates in there, you can see there's plenty of room up front because the O3 is gonna sit all the way up here. There's just a lot of room back here. So the capacitor can sit there fine, and that'll give us room in the back for the O3. Next thing we're gonna do is the motors, but before I bolt the motors on, I'm just gonna go through and actually tin all the motor pads. So we're just gonna get a little bit of solder on all these motor pads, and then we'll mount the motors. Okay, we've got all the motor pads tinned. They look okay, not too bad. So now we're gonna get the motors mounted up. What you wanna do is find a screw length that will go all the way through the motor mount and come at least flush with the top of the motor mount, but not so far that you go in and touch those windings, those gold looking wires. You don't want the screw to go through and touch those. So if we look at these, that one is a little long, but I think it'll be okay. I'll probably end up, maybe I'll just use all the short ones. Those will be all right. Okay, so we're getting our motors mounted up. See how they're coming up above the motor mount, but just slightly. Not enough that they're gonna go touch the windings, but enough that they are grabbing all the threads. All right, so we've got all the motors mounted up, 3D printed feet. This thing's looking sick now. And now we've got all this mess of wires that's very annoying. So the next thing we're gonna do now is cut our motor wire length. I'm gonna go through and measure and cut the length for all these. When you're cutting, leave a good bit of slack, like more than you think you're gonna need, because you can always trim them up after and then solder them on. But if you cut them too short, you're really just screwed. It's not gonna be good. So lay them flat on the arm, kind of measure out how they're gonna sit, and then cut a good, I don't know, 1/8 inch or 1/2 inch or whatever you think you need extra. Just cut plenty of extra. Just snip those. So we can trim them up in a second too. We just want to make sure, see how much extra I have there. It's going to go to these pads here, but you can see how much extra is overlaid there. That's what you want to have. We can trim up more later, but if you cut, too much, it's going to suck. It's not going to be good. So I'm going to go through and trim all these real quick. Okay, so we've got these a bit more trimmed up now. Again, always keep all these trimmings. No joke, you never know when you're gonna need these or use them for anything else. I always keep all this stuff. Just keep it in a box. It comes in handy. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna come in and do a bit more of a precise cut on these. So laying them flat on the arm, how they're gonna go. And so just to quickly explain this, the way this works is, actually you can see it right here, 4, 2, 1, and 3. So those are your different motor outputs. So 3 pads is for one motor, obviously, because you have 3 wires. So the way this works is, when you're doing this, the closest 3 pads to that motor are what the wires go to. So you're gonna run the wires up to the ESC there, right, like that. And what this is how this is gonna go is you're gonna have 1, 2, 3 pads here, right? So these 3 here are gonna go to this motor, and then you have over here, you're gonna have 1, 2, 3. These 3 pads are gonna go to this motor. Same thing on the other side. Each motor has 3 pads, starting from the closest one to the motor. Now it doesn't matter which wire goes to which pad. So of these 3 pads over here, you could have any 3 of these wires go to any 3 pads. There's no order or anything to how these wires go on. Because later on in Betaflight, when you set the quad up in the computer, that's when you're gonna tell the flight controller which motor is where, and you're gonna tell it which motor direction. So that's basically what this is. That being said, I'm gonna go in now and do a bit more of a more precise cut on these wires. So I always just use electrical tape and tape them down flat on the wire. That's the cleanest look for me anyway. That's just how I like to do it. So I'm gonna come in here. So I've only cut off, a very small amount of wires. Because we wanna make sure that those I don't save, not those little pieces. So now if the motors were actually on there, you'd see, if they were soldered to the pads, you see this little loop here, which we can pull that further back and it can sit, about like that. So I think I'm okay with that length of wire. I'm not gonna cut them back anymore. If you wanted to, because you don't want them to be so tight to the ESC that it's like tugging on it or anything, because you want these to lay flat on the arm. So you still want to have a little bit of slack, but that's just a little tighter of a cut. Okay, so now we've got all the motor wires trimmed to the actual length we want them before we solder them on. The next thing we're going to want to do is pull some insulation off just a little bit. You can use your fingernail typically. You really just want to pull off a small amount of insulation. You don't need a lot. You just need enough insulation pulled off to where you can have a good connection soldered on there. You don't want to have a bunch of exposed wire. So pull a small amount of insulation off. You're going to go through, do that on all the motor wires so that we can tin them before we actually solder them on. Okay, so the way I do this as far as tinning my motor wires, I just use this sticky tack, the blue tack stuff. Again, just get a little solder on the end of your tip here, on the end of your iron. And melt some solder in. You can see those are all nicely tinned. All right, so we've got all the motor wires tinned now. We're gonna get them soldered to the ESC. And the way I like to do this is, because I'm gonna run them flat on the arm, I want them like, you know, in order next to each other. So I don't like them, you know, like from the motor. I don't wanna have them like twisted or crossed or anything. I like to have them flat. And then so I'll run them like that. So obviously, they're running flat. The first wire is going to go to this pad, second wire to the next pad, third wire to the next pad. That's how I like to run them. Get that soldered on, looks good. This is our second wire. Soldered on, looks good. And our third wire. Nice. So we can see all those. They look very good, nicely melted in. I showed you how to do the one. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna solder the rest of these onto the ESC off camera and then we'll move on. All right, so there we go. We've got all the motor wires on. They all look very nice, nicely melted in. At least, you know, good enough for what I think is okay. No, they'll be fine. They all look good. So next thing I'm gonna do is get some tape on these motor wires and kind of clean these up. Okay, so I've got all the standoffs on now, just to kind of help see where things are going. One thing I did forget to do was get the cable that goes from the ESC, you can kind of see under there, goes from the ESC to the flight controller, so we need to get that plugged in. Now, this V4 stack does come with two of them. One's a bit longer if you were gonna do, let's say if you're gonna have the ESC face a different way than the flight controller, then you'd have enough cable length to run from one to the other. Rather than have the short one that's just going straight up and down. So if you are doing a build with this flipped or the flight controller flipped, you have this longer cable. I'm gonna have this stuff facing the same way. So we just need to get this cable, a small cable. It only goes on one way, so you just have to pay attention. If you look, probably won't be able to see it on camera, but when you look, the pins on the plug are closer to the bottom, and then you look at this plug, which again you probably won't be able to see, but the pins are on the bottom there, so you just kind of line those up. All right, there we go, it's plugged in. It won't be an issue with the capacitor once we kind of push this down. It'll be fine, just like that. The next thing I'm gonna do is get the O3 Air Unit mounted up, but there's a few things we gotta do to this before we mount it. First thing we gotta do is pop the antenna off, because that's gonna run through a 3D printed part. So we just gotta there's two screws on the end here. Okay, so this back little piece pops off, and then you can access your antennas here. And basically what you wanna do is grab as close as you can to the little copper piece and just kind of lift up and just kind of pop it off. Grab close to the copper piece, kind of lift up, pop it off. The next thing we need to do is remove some wires from this. Because we're using Express ELRS, or if you were using Crossfire, whatever you're using, unless you're using the Air Unit as your control link and you're using the DJI remote, if you're using Crossfire or Express ELRS or whatever, then you're gonna need to remove some wires from this so that Betaflight doesn't get confused and think you're running S-Bus or whatever. This we can see on the very end here, we've got red wire. That's gonna be our power, so that's 9 volt, 10 volt, whatever it is. Next to that's the black wire is gonna be ground. Then it's gonna be RX and TX are the gray and light gray, or white and gray. And then the last two wires are another ground and a signal, or S-Bus and ground, something like that. The yellow and the orange ones on the end are only used if you are using the DJI remote. So if you're using the DJI remote, you need to keep these on there. If you're using Ghost or ELRS, Crossfire, whatever else, you're gonna need to remove these two wires. So we're gonna unplug this from the air unit. Very closely at the plug, you'll see the little tabs there. So what you can do is actually get like a little razor blade or tweezers or something and kind of lift up on those tabs and pop the wires out. And again, we want to remove the orange and yellow wire and keep the other ones. And you also want to do that on both sides of the plug. You're just going to pop it off on both sides. Or if you want to, honestly, you could just cut it right at the plug. Like if you can get it flush with the plug, just cut it there and cut it there. That also works. It all depends on what flight controller you're using. If you're using the same stack as me, if you're following along in the build, the Speedybee stacks have a plug specifically for the O3. So when you look at it, it's going to show, let's see. So it's going to show 9-volt ground, T1, R1 ground, and S bus. So again, you would use the ground and S bus if you're using the O3 Air Unit as your control link. If you're not, that's why you need to remove those two wires. The ground and S bus need to come off. Or another option, when we look at our pads, we also have the same pads here. We've got 9-volt ground, R1 and T1, and then S bus if you were going to solder on. But even if you're just soldering wires and you're using your own control link, 9-volt ground, R1, T1. So it's up to you. You can use the plug, you know, it makes it easy. You just plug it in. You don't have to worry about soldering or anything. Or you can solder them on there if you want to. I think I'm going to use the plug just to make it easy, but I'm going to remove those wires. Okay, so for this 3D print, because of the length of the stock on the O3 Air Unit antenna, it's got this plastic part that comes down if you were going to mount it like further up depending on your print. But for my print, it's too long, so I actually had to cut it, and now I have this little length here that I need to remove from the print. Probably just put a razor blade between the two antennas and then cut down and slice that in half so I can pull it off. Okay, so I've sliced that in half and now the two pieces come off. The antenna wires are fine, I didn't cut anything there, so that's good. So that way when we mount this on the quad, we can mount this up here and we have all this free cable to play with as far as mounting it back on the O3. And then now you can see that I've removed the two wires we don't need from the O3 Air Unit cable. So now we just have our power, ground, RX, and TX. So now we can plug that in and that'll work out good. I'm gonna mount the O3 now. So the way I'm gonna mount this is I'm gonna use some double-sided sticky tape, and I'm probably gonna make two pieces that are gonna sit on each side. That way there's a small channel down the center, and then when I plug in my cable, the cable's gonna run underneath the air unit like that. But that little channel of this kind of cushion foam tape will allow it to be plugged in and then run underneath. That way everything kind of stays in the drone. And basically make a little roll out of it. And put it on the O3. So basically like that, right? I just kind of folded it over, and we gotta make another one now. So we got those two pieces on there, and we can plug this back in. Make sure you plug it in correctly. It only goes in one way. Okay, so now that we got those little pieces in, we're basically gonna take the wires and try to straighten them out. So that's the point of creating a little channel there so that the wires can sit. So yeah, we got them running through like that, all good. Pull this out of the way, and then we're just going to stick this down just like that. It's a little off-centered. I kind of f***ed that up. That's okay. I think it'll be okay anyway. But yeah, we got plenty of room. We're good. Okay, so that'll work out fine. Okay, so now we need to plug in our flight controller and get that mounted. I'm gonna run my O3 Air Unit camera cable between the two boards just to kind of keep that held down. Make sure the pins line up correctly. And now we can take the O3 Air Unit wires and we can kind of twist these up and then get this plugged in. The plug's going in correctly. So we got the O3 plugged in. Flight controller's on. The next thing I'm gonna do is get the receiver on. That way we can get the rear antenna on and the O3 antenna. So our receiver did not actually come with any wires, which is why, like I said, you should keep all of your extra wires. So we gotta get some wires for this thing. We're gonna need a 5-volt ground, an RX, and a TX. Wire color doesn't matter, just it makes it easier if you have the correct wire color, but they're just wires, it's just color and insulation, so choose what you want. And then we need enough wire to mount this where we want to mount it. So we got to figure out a spot to mount this. Okay, so we've got our Express ELRS receiver here. We just got to tin these pads real quick, like you would anything else. RX, TX, 5-volt, ground. Okay, that all looks good. And I've got some extra wires here, like I said, from my little bin. So I'm gonna go through and tin all these on both ends. Okay, so we've got all those tinned. Those are all good. We're gonna get them on here now. So from my left hand here to the right, it's RX, TX, 5-volt, and ground. I'm not sure which wire color is supposed to be what for R&T. I don't care. I'm just going to use what I have, and I know which ones go where. Okay, so those are all soldered. Those look good. So if you don't know, RX goes to TX and TX to RX. You'll see on the yellow wire is the R and T is on the white wire. So that's RX and TX. So RX and TX is receive and transmit. So R is receiving, T is transmitting. So you can think of them as talking and listening. So on here we have RX and TX. This RX wire, so the receive wire, needs to go to the T on the flight controller. So if we look on the flight controller here up front, you'll see this is T2 and R2. So same thing, TX and RX. So transmit and receive. So you don't want a receive going to a receive because they're both listening but nobody's talking. Same thing with transmit. TX is transmit. You don't want a TX going to a TX because they're both talking but neither one's listening because it's transmitting. So you want the TX pad on here to go to the RX pad on your receiver, or the TX pad on here to go to the RX pad on here. So they're opposites. T on here goes to R on the other thing, and the R on this goes to the T on this. I recommend going to, if we can read it right here, there's a 4v5 pad. So if you ever see 4v5 or 3v3 like this one here, those pads, what that means is it gets power from USB. So when you're in beta flight and you're trying to configure everything, when you're plugged into USB, your receiver will get power through USB. So you don't need a LiPo plugged in, overheating everything. Your receiver will be powered on and you can configure and do all that without having a LiPo plugged in. It's very nice. All right, now we got to tin the pads on here, like I said. Oh, there we go. So yeah, we're gonna use R2, T2, 4v5 and ground on the end there. Okay, those are nicely tinned. So like I said, I don't care about wire color necessarily, but just that the right wire's going to the right place. So we're gonna start with the RX, which on our receiver, the RX is the yellow wire. So remember, receive needs to be listening to someone who's talking. TX is transmit, transmit's talking. So we need to go to the very end pad is the transmit pad. Okay, very good. Okay, so we've got our RX on here going to a TX on here, remember, because you want a transmit going to a receive, and that's going to go to the next pad. There we go. That's better. All right. Next pad is our 4v5. So our 5-volt wire is going to go to the 4v5. And the last one is ground. There we go. Okay, so we can see those. Those all look good. So now we got our receiver hooked up. I'm gonna get the front camera plates on, and we're gonna get the camera mounted up. We can just leave this sit here for right now. The camera does come with screws already installed, so we gotta pop these out. Now, this frame kit comes with 2 different colors of the 3D prints. The pink ones are thicker than the blue ones. So if we look at the difference in the thicknesses, the pink one's thicker. That's gonna be for like your 19mm camera, your standard size, or like the Avatar. The blue one is thinner because the O3 Air Unit camera is a very wide camera. So we wanna use the blue ones to give us enough room. Okay, that was sort of a nightmare. I have found that it's much easier to just take the 3D prints and just mount them to the camera like this and then put everything in there, because there was no way I was doing that before. So now we should be able to put these camera plates in here like this, kind of slide them over, right? And then put the prints on like that. And then kind of get these camera plates. Okay, yeah, I think that works. So you can see now it's mounted up. I still got the plastic piece on there. I want to keep the lens nice, but yeah, so now you can see it's mounted up nicely, nice soft mount. And that's probably about the lowest camera angle you can have, which is almost straight, not bad. And then if you really want to, you know, kick that thing up, you could have quite a gnarly camera angle if you wanted to. So I'm gonna get the antennas on here and get those antennas mounted, and then we'll finish with the O3. We're just about done here. Antenna, or the bigger one, I'm gonna use the bigger one just because it's a bit more robust. This will kind of be in here a little loose, but it's fine. It's not gonna go anywhere. It can't come out. So I'm gonna take this long antenna. So this one's really long because we're mounting up front for the receiver. So I'm gonna slide this down. Okay, so unfortunately I couldn't mount the antenna up front on the front end like I wanted to, like I do on some of my other quads. This one I want a different frame because this frame is, again, too tight to build in, but this one I've got just zip tied to this front bar, and that works really well. Rear mount just like normal. This one's good, but unfortunately I couldn't find a spot to mount up front. There's just nothing to grab onto. So I'm just gonna stick it out here on the arm. I've just got it taped down and it'll sit out there on the arm. And I think it'll be fine, honestly. No big deal. And then I've just got the receiver kind of hanging out there in between the front plates. It's kind of stuck down to the capacitor. So now we need to do the O3 Air Unit antennas. And what we gotta do first is get these on here. Doesn't matter which one goes where. As far as the 2 antennas and the 2 things on here, doesn't matter which one goes on what side, but okay, that one's on. Now we can put this plate back on. All right, so we got that plate on there, that's good. Get the O3 mounted, and these ones you can just kind of fold over like that. I know the angles are pretty tight, but I have this like this on one of my other quads where they're like folded over like this, and it's fine. It doesn't have any issues. So that will just go on like that and go down like that. So yeah, it looks a little funky, but it'll work fine. Okay, so I really up this build video. So I'm sorry, this build video is terrible. Hopefully it still helps you, you know, with your builds, or if you're gonna follow along and do this same build. But I'm gonna show you what I messed up and how I fixed it. Then we're gonna go fly this thing. We'll see how it does. Hopefully at least it flies well, right? Okay, so the first thing that I messed up was the XT60 lead. One of the biggest things that I didn't want to have is the XT60 coming out the side, because I don't like having them come out the side plate and then, you know, the props hit it. If it's coming out of the side here, it just gets in the way of the props. It's very annoying. And so my original plan was to run it through like this, like it is now, but I didn't think it would work, and I just was like, oh, whatever. I just ran it out the side, and it became a big problem. That was not good. The other thing was the capacitor. I didn't have the wires long enough from the bottom side of this through, and so it was kind of cramped against the side of the stack there. So now there's quite a bit more room for the capacitor to sit. It's not, you know, jammed against the wires or anything. So that just needed to be a little longer, and now it's stuck down with some sticky tape, so it's not going anywhere. The antenna was fine the whole time. This mount's good. That works fine. And then this one, this antenna mount, that works good too. The antenna cables are just kind of folded over. They'll be fine like that. I've got other quads like this. As long as they're not like completely kinked and smashed, they're fine. And then the receiver, we did mount one of the antennas to the arm, which I normally don't like, but this is fine for this. It's got the feet here too, so it shouldn't be a problem. And then that just runs up to the receiver here. I did put some hot glue on here to help hold down the UFL connectors. So, but yeah, we've got the receiver stuck down to the top of the flight controller with some double-sided sticky tape. So that's sitting there. Now when I have my top plate on, the XT60 just comes out the back, which works out well. And then that can either go to the side of the video transmitter, the antenna there. That can go to the side and plug in, or it can go wrap around each way and plug in. That's a much better setup rather than having it come out of the side, you know, where it was, and then you're gonna get prop strikes, and it's just annoying to have to try to strap it down to the side. I wanted it coming out the back. Coming out the front would work too, but we just didn't have the room because there is a GoPro mount that goes there. So I'm sorry this build video was not the greatest, but again, like I said, I'm just gonna kind of show you this setup and what we got going on. And then we do have these wires here that are kind of zip tied to this standoff to kind of help hold those down. So that way when the top plate's on, I can run my battery straps through and I don't have to worry about anything getting in the way. So there's plenty of clearance in there to have the battery straps move around. So I'm gonna put the rest of this together and we can take a look at what it looks like. All right, so here's how it looks with all the 3D prints on. We got the GoPro mount. Yeah, it looks pretty good actually. Not too bad. I like the purple motors and the feet. Yeah, it's a pretty solid looking rig. I'm gonna throw a battery on real quick and show you that. But either way, now it's a much more stable way to plug this in. So now we don't have to worry about prop strikes or anything. It sits back there, it's nice and stable. Looks good.
Danger.
All right, so yeah, everything's looking good now. Again, sorry this build video is kind of garbage, but it's all good. So yeah, everything's working good. I already got everything configured. Everything's set up in the computer. We got a preset tune on it. So let's take this thing out and see how it flies. I did weigh this and compare it to my other ones. This one's about 500 grams with nothing on it, with no battery. This thing is a chunky drone. My Skyliner and my Speedybee quads are both about 417 and 430. So this thing's quite a bit heavier. So I'm curious to see how it flies, but I think it'll be all right. So yeah, let's go give this thing a test flight and see how it does. Okay, what do we got here? So this is his fresh new build. This is a Recon 7. If you notice here, this is great. If you look at the front of the O3,
oh yeah, I love
the plastic is still on there.
Put it on there for testing purposes.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't want to scratch it up doing a hover test.
So we got the new build, the Moxy. I'm gonna fly the Moxy. Here's the best part. I finally switched to the Blue Jay, and when you plug it in, sick. Okay, and record. We're recording in the goggles. I'm gonna do this first flight recording the goggles, but I'll show some GoPro footage too. We are not running the GoPro on this first flight, just so I can really see how it flies without the extra weight.
Danger. Danger.
We had a little ground touch there. That's okay. See if we can hit a little loop on the building here. Yup. Yeah, this, whatever it is, Blue Jay, and having the RPM filtering, running the Superfly preset, this thing runs really well. I think having Blue Jay does make a difference in the PID stuff as far as like tuning and having the RPM filtering. It just seems a lot smoother. So I think I'm gonna switch all my quads to Blue Jay. Oof, almost hit that tree. That was scary. That was a 4-minute flight. Not bad. Not bad without the GoPro. Motors are cool. Nice. So yeah, it ran pretty good. All right, so the first flight went really well. Like I said, I'm running, I f***ed up my arm a little bit. So I'm running Blue Jay. I think I'm on 24, is it 24 kilohertz for the what do you call that? Yeah, the pulse width modulation is at 24 kilohertz, I think is what it is. And yeah, seems to be running good. Like I said, the Superfly preset tune with RPM filtering. The next flight, we'll run the GoPro. I'll show you some of that footage and kind of how it flies and flight time with the extra weight of the GoPro. It is not super warm today. It's not bad. I mean, it's warm to us, but it's still only probably maybe 60 degrees. So if it was a bit warmer, maybe 70, 80, we might get even better flight time out of it. All right, so now we got the GoPro on there. So we're gonna see how it flies with the GoPro. It is very heavy with the GoPro, and it probably will only fly for like 2.5, 3 minutes, depending on temperature and what I'm doing. But yeah, we're gonna send it out with the GoPro, get some footage with that, and see how that looks. Kinda love that sound. This is recording. We're all good. All right, there we go. Ooh, that was close. That was a bit scary. If I'm gonna be honest, I thought I was gonna crash. Almost hit another tree there. That scared me. Oh, those are disorienting. The switchbacks, the inverted yaw, but you come back the other way. Oh, that's crazy. Those are kind of cool. Man, this thing flies so good with that, what is it, bidirectional D-shot, so you can do RPM filtering. Because all my quads before this, I was just, I would use the Superfly preset tune, the 5-inch freestyle tune, but I wasn't running Blue Jay, and everything was on like Heli S or whatever, and it was okay, but man, it just seems that it's so smooth now running Blue Jay with the RPM filtering. It just runs good. That was actually a good run right there, not too bad. All right guys, well that's gonna bring us to the end of the video. I'm super excited, the quad flew really well. I wanna thank everybody that watches my videos, everyone that's subscribed to me, likes the videos. It's a big help to me. It just gives me motivation to keep going. So thank you guys to every one of you. If you like what I do here on this channel and you wanna see more, hit the subscribe button. We got plenty more stuff coming, more build videos, long range flights, freestyle. We're gonna do a bunch of stuff this summer. Now that the weather's starting to get nice, I got a bunch of plans to do a whole lot of different type of flying. And now also I got a couple buddies that are gonna be flying with me, so that's always good. If we keep going with the channel and subscribers and whatnot, I probably will do a giveaway at some point, just because, you know, I build so many quads, do so much stuff. I would like to give back to you guys, you know, if I get to, you know, certain subscribers or whatever. I don't have like a specific number in mind, but like, if this whole thing keeps going, I'm definitely gonna do a giveaway, so stay tuned for that. Like I said, if you wanna see more of me, hit the subscribe button. But other than that, I wanna thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.